Former Liberal Cabinet Minister Christopher Pyne and former Labor leader Bill Shorten join me now. Welcome to you both.
Thank you, Sarah.
Bill Shorten, 2019 polls, can we trust them now?
Well, the lead that Labor appears to have in the polls now is greater than what was the case in 2019. Yeah, listen, can I just say what a lot of people are thinking out there who follow politics? It is the Liberal campaign would have to be the worst campaign since maybe Mark Latham's in 2004 or maybe the 1977 election. This is probably the biggest train wreck in an election in 18 federal elections. I'm sure the professional in Chris is quietly like an Edward Munch painting. He's sort of screaming on the inside.
That's an Edvard Munch painting, Bill Shorten.
Yes. Oh, there we go.
There we go.
It's better than mine.
Christopher...
Well, here we go again. Aperitivo, digestivo, Edvard Munch.
Yes, with all the corrections I'm getting.
Yeah.
I think we need to spend some time off camera, Bill.
Yes,
talking culture, talking arts,
touring the galleries.
We're going to do that.
You get my point.
Election.
It's a nightmare, the coalition campaign.
Come back to me, gentlemen. Christopher Pyne, I noticed this evening Sky News has already unsheathed the knives. They're running headlines, disastrous Liberal campaign, will Peter Dutton remain? Is all hope lost? What do you say?
Well, look, I think that's all very exciting and sounds very bleak, but the election's on Saturday. A lot of people have already voted. My sense is that the election result for the coalition is not going to be nearly as bad as either the polls show or the bubble suggests. And I think there'll be some quite unusual results in a number of different seats. And I still believe that Labor will be in a minority if they form a government. I don't believe they'll hang on to all their seats or increase their majority. I think that is a lot of hyperbole. And I think out in the suburbs, there are a lot of people who can't pay their bills, a lot of people who are very angry about cost of living and petrol prices and the way things have been run over the last 3 years, and that will show up on election day, but I doubt they're talking to the pollsters. I'm reminded that Hillary Clinton was going to beat Donald Trump, if you might remember, in 2016. The polls always show often show different results to what actually happens when people get to vote. So let's wait to see before we start the doom and gloom that's going on. All
right, Chris, I just want to stay with you for a minute just to talk a little bit about the campaign this week, because Peter Dutton did return in some ways to the culture wars. He said there were too many welcome to country ceremonies. Maybe less importantly, he called the ABC hate media. What's he doing with that sort of commentary? Is this an appeal to right-wing voters to keep them with the Liberals and to mitigate against them going off to One Nation or Trumpet?
No, not at all. I don't think we need to worry about right-wing voters voting for the Liberal Party. I think they will definitely do so. There are no right-wing voters voting for the Labor Party. And if they vote for the Trumpet of Patriots or for One Nation, their preferences will come back to the Liberal Party. That's the reality, in the same way as most people who vote Green will come back to the Labor Party, and that's becoming increasingly the case with some of the Teals. So, look, that's just a political reality of the situation. Now, I think Peter Dutton was reacting to the hatchet job done on him and his family by Four Corners on Monday night, and I think he's perfectly entitled to do that. I mean, it's human nature to not want to have your reputation dragged through the mud, and I think people understand that.
Let me just come back to Bill Shorten, just on the first response that Chris made about what's happening with the right-wing vote.
I think you absolutely nailed it, Sarah. The history is that when right-wing voters think their party, the Liberals, is not going to win, they spray off to smaller right-wing parties. I think I said that a couple of episodes ago in this gig. The problem is it's not quite... I mean, Chris's words must be a sort of soothing balm and tonic for anxious Liberal backbenchers in marginal seats. But the truth of the matter is that One Nation's preferences historically have flowed about 65% to the Liberal Party. So they don't want to see primary votes, which they need in their poll, going anywhere else. So I think the One Nation stuff is a problem for the Conservatives, and I think... but I've got to say, yeah, sure, I know Peter doesn't want he or his family being smeared, but I guess it only ever happens to Liberals, doesn't it? It never happens to Labor people. So, I think elections are tough. You get tested in elections. But I don't know why he went on the frolic about the welcome to country. That's got bugger all to do with the cost of living. Chris wouldn't have been so undisciplined. When he sticks on a message, he is like a ferocious Rottweiler on the topic.
It's true.
Just staying with you for
Like
for a minute.
Velcro. I'm like Velcro shoes. Like Velcro shoes, which are fortunately out of fashion.
They'll be back.
You don't
They
own
could
any
be back.
Velcro shoes,
They're
Chris.
probably big here
Let's-
at the
let's-
ABC. I'm going to have a look on my way
Let's
out.
step away from the shoe. Let's step away from the shoe
really
obsession.
own them?
Just a
Anyway,
question
yeah,
to
let's-
Bill Shorten. Do you think that Anthony Albanese is looking a little bit overconfident?
No, he is hungry. I think even his trenchant critics would say that really not just since the start of the campaign, but since the start of the year, he's had a strategy. I mean, hats off to him. He's been confident that he can form a majority government. And to be honest, his predictions are more accurate than Peter Dutton's have been.
Chris, I want to actually bring in a little grab at this point because one of the debates over the last week, one of the discussions, yes, in the commentariat, I accept that, has been about a lack of discipline, maybe a breakdown in communication between the travelling press corps and Liberal HQ. So I think this is from today. These are two grabs, one from Peter Dutton earlier and then a few hours later from Jacinta Price, unless I've got the order wrong. But let's just watch the two grabs.
What would you change about the curriculum? Just going back to that question.
We don't have any proposals. Yeah.
Well, with the conversations that I have had with our Shadow Cabinet Minister, Sarah Henderson, there is a plan to ensure that schools are no longer ideologically indoctrinating children, that they're actually teaching education.
So that obviously goes to the culture war question, because that question of indoctrination in education was an important one earlier in the campaign. But the question here is really about discipline. Is that the sign of an ill-disciplined campaign, or is that just a mistake at the end of a long, tiring campaign?
Look, Sarah, I think the coalition's had a good last week, and I think the issues have been running in their favour. I think people have started to focus more on things like the 25% cut to fuel and also the cost of living tax offset, and realising it's a much more popular policy than the Labor Party's tax cuts. And I don't see the doom and gloom that everybody else is seeing. I've been on pre-polls this last week in my electorate of Sturt supporting James Stephens there, and the feeling is very positive on the ground. So it's going to be fascinating to see the outcome of this election, because everybody in the commentariat has written off the coalition, but I've seen the Canberra bubble get these things wrong before, and no one's ever accused me of being anti the bubble or anti the ABC, but the reality is the Canberra Press Gallery does get themselves into a lather about what people are actually saying, when in fact I'm not sure they're actually talking to a lot of people outside Canberra. So I don't see the result being nearly as bad as a lot of people are saying. I think people will get a surprise on election night, but I don't think that we'll get a result in many seats for days and days afterwards, because we now have an election voting period more so than an election day. You think that the number of people who voted pre-poll and postal has increased by many percents, in fact by millions of votes, and I think there will be some time before many seats are decided.
Well, that's quite a thought, Chris. But just staying with you for a minute, it's time to get your hands dirty. You just mentioned your former seat of Sturt.
Yes.
Labor thinks they're in with a chance. Are they?
Well, they always think they're in with a chance with Sturt. The number of times they wrote me off it's hard to remember, but I love it when Labor says they're going to win Sturt, because it always rallies the faithful of Sturt to support the Liberal Party, and I'm sure that's exactly what will happen in this election. James Stephens is doing a marvellous job. He's a very good advocate for Sturt. He's a strong voice in Canberra, and I think he will win. And I think one of the things that's underestimated is that Scott Morrison was very unpopular in the last federal election in seats like Sturt and many of the Teal seats that were lost. Scott Morrison is not an issue at this election, and I don't think that the swing will be to Labor in many of those seats.
All right, Bill Shorten, you're going to have to talk to us about Victoria. You talked about it earlier on during the campaign when we were together. What's going to happen in Labor's seats in Victoria?
Well, you know, hats off to Chris's optimism. You could bottle it. In terms of Victoria, I think it was a lot more diabolical 6-7 weeks ago. But now I think, you know, we talk about last-minute stunts. For Angus Taylor, the Alternative Treasurer, to drop out his costings 36 hours before the final day of the election festival.
Just like Labor did last time, but anyway, carry on.
Just like Labor did last time.
Yeah, it's a lack of discipline, and you all screamed out about it, so what's good for the goose is good for the gander. But when you actually look at it, two bigger deficits, and as for the funding for the nuclear power sort of utopian unicorn project, you know, it's practically invisible. At the University of Canberra, students come up to me and they say, is it really the case that the alternative side will raise our student debt?
Come back to the seats, Bill Shorten, with our final seconds.
Well, I think that
predictions.
If the election had been held in February, it might have been tougher going in a number of seats. But I suspect that Aston's a battle. There's no question about that. But I think in the outer suburbs of Melbourne, they've had a look at Peter Dutton and gone, nah, not this time.
Gentlemen, we're going to have to leave it there, but we will return to you, I'm happy to say, after the election to test who was right and to read back to you all the things you said this evening. I cannot wait. Thank you both very much indeed.
I'll have my Velcro shoes by then.
Excellent.
Sarah, so.
Yeah, and I'll be practicing my foreign language menu
Yes,
stations.
Very good indeed. Thank you.
Hasta la vista.